We're going to get started. I just wanted to give a couple words of welcome. My name is Ashley Healy, and I'm the president of the Special Education Parent Advisory Council for Concord Public Schools and Concord Carlisle Regional Schools. I'm really happy to see you all. Thank you so much for being here for the first in a series of events we're putting on this year about many things having to do with health and mood and brain chemistry and all these wonderful things. Wanted to give a special thank you to our events chair, Dr. Karen Hodges, and our publicity chair, Chris Tarlow, who have worked tirelessly to put this together, and of course to the library for hosting us. And Karen will also tell you a lot about our wonderful sponsors who we could not have put this on without. So again, thank you for being here. The CPAC is a parent volunteer-run organization here in town, and we are here to support parents with resources and many other things, including programs like this. I wanted to let everyone know that anytime you want, you can visit our website at concordcpac.org to find out about events like this and other things that we have going on. We also hold office hours once a week on Tuesdays here at the library, just down the hall in the cafeteria area. I myself or another board member will be here from 11 to 12:30 every Tuesday, or on the third Tuesday, we're here in the evening from 6 to 8. So come see us if you ever want to chat or vent or ask a question or anything like that. So thank you so much again, and I'll have Karen take it from here. Thanks, Karen.
Welcome, everybody. I'm so happy that we have such a nice crowd came out on this rainy day. You're in for a wonderful treat. I first want to make sure to thank our sponsors. So we have a number of sponsors who have made it so we can have this 4-part educational series. And I'm going to tell you a bit about that, but first I'm going to say thank you to the Concord School District, the Parent Association, the Lincoln CPAC, the Carlisle CPAC, Emerson Dental kicked in a ton to help ensure that we can get through this whole series. And we also want to thank Kids Centered. Dr. Avon Miles Mason is actually here tonight, and she's also on a couple of our panels and presenting. And she's really been very generous. Her company has been super generous around this offering so that we can provide all of this evidence-based information to you guys. We also want to thank Fusion Academy, another one of our big sponsors, also Waldorf School, Saltbox Kitchen, Lexington CPAC, and of course the Concord Free Public Library. We have an amazing lecture series, and I sent around some of these for people to look at. You just pass it around, and I will hand a couple more so you can look at them and learn about what we're going to do this year. As you know, you're here for Plate to Mind. The next one is going to be Innovative Currents, and it's going to be like a think tank up in front, discussing the benefits of outdoor school experiences, much like Rivers and Revolutions. If any of you know about Rivers and Revolutions, it's a program in the high school. We're going to have a presentation, and actually, Angel Charles, who's here in the back and has been a wonderful supporter of our program, is going to be on that panel as well. You guys can all wave to Angel. And so that's going to be very much like a think tank, right? Like you're going to come and think together about what would it be like for K-8 schools to implement something like that? Like what would that look like? And how could that benefit kids socially, emotionally? The next one's going to be called Growth, Harmonizing Solitude, Guidance, and Freedom. And that one's really going to talk about the benefit of balancing adult direction, child-centered time, solitude, like what is the benefit of just sitting on a rock somewhere in the middle of nowhere? And so really thinking about all those things. And the final one we're going to do, we're going to want you to help us bring people out for it. We're going to bring Kareem Weaver out. This is what you should look for in your pamphlet. We're going to hopefully bring out at least 500 people to Concord Carlisle High School to hear from Kareem Weaver. And we also have people from DESE and also somebody from, DESE, Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, thank you. And then we're also going to have the CEO from METCO coming on out too for that one. And it's called Literacy Liberates. And we're just super excited about that. We hope you come for that as well. So that's enough from me, but I just wanted to thank our presenters for tonight as well. Dr. Maura Scanlon, she's an incredible naturopathic physician. She's got a depth of knowledge, and she's been doing this work for many, many years. And she's going to share a lot of great information about food, which is what we all want to learn about tonight. And we're going to hear from Stephanie Griesberg, is going to be one of our panelists, and also Joanne Sespler. So I'm going to step away now and let Maura take it from here. Thank you, Dr. Scanlon.
Thank you, Karen. All righty. I have a lot of information to get through, so I'm going to go fairly quickly, but we're going to have a discussion panel afterwards, so if we can re-talk about things. First, a little bit of information about me. This is me in Bath, England. This is one of the Roman bath spas, which is really high in sulfur, and it was they would drink the water for medicinal purposes. It was really full of a lot of minerals. Just a little bit of my educational background. I've had a lifelong love of learning. I did my associates in pre-med at Schiller University in London, and I did my Bachelor of Arts in the School of Natural Science in Hampshire College in Western Mass. I then, this is my parents, and they are no longer with us, but when your 12-year-old kid tells you they want to become a naturopathic physician and you support them, I give a little shout out to them. Then I moved to Seattle, Washington. I went to Bastyr University and studied naturopathic medicine. This is their medicinal herb gardens, and that's where I lived for 27 years before relocating to Concord 2 years ago. So this is one of my clinics that I opened. This was a ribbon cutting ceremony for one of my clinics in Issaquah, Washington. Okay. So a little bit of clarification, because when you're working with mental health, and if you're starting to read some of the more updated podcasts and articles, you'll hear the word functional medicine. So I just want to give a little definition clarification for you. So naturopathic medicine is functional medicine. So as naturopaths, we were always trained to use functional medicine. Now you will have medical providers and healthcare coaches that will say they do functional medicine, but as naturopaths, we've always done functional medicine, which really means looking for the root cause of a disease and using a lot of the new modern testing and diagnostic tests so you can look for what's the underlying cause. So I just wanted to give a little definition clarification. So diet and the role in optimal mental health. So mental health, any category from anxiety, depression, ADD, ADHD, neurodivergent, eating disorders, schizophrenia, just to list a few. There's no one size fits all. Genetics, your heritage, your blood type, your food allergies, your sensitivities, all these are part of making an individual treatment plan. So you really need to look at all of them. Okay. Everyone is biochemically unique, and when you're addressing mental health, you have to consider all factors. Environmental toxins, is there heavy metal, pollutants, diet, genetics, digestive health, malabsorption, celiac, food allergies, candida overgrowth, maybe because they have a long history of antibiotics, chronic strep throat. The mind and body are one system. To divide the body into an individual system, it works for surgeries, right? You see your shoulder specialist, your knee specialist. It does not work when you're dealing with mental health. The body is one system. What occurs in the gut occurs in the brain. So, diet, what we eat on a daily basis. What's our proteins? What's our carbohydrates? Our fats, our vitamins, and minerals. We'll start with fats, extremely important. Seeds and fish oils. Omega-3 fatty acid. So when you're looking at a label or you're trying to understand what omega-3 is, there are three breakdowns. There's DHA, EPA, and ALA. DHA, docosahexaenoic acid, EPA, eicosapentaenoic acid, and ALA is alpha-linolenic acid. DHA is the most important in brain health, and we can only make a small amount in our system, so we need to get it through the diet, either as supplements or through food. Really important for women when they're pregnant to take a DHA supplement. It's very high in fish, but due to heavy metal and mercuries, pregnant women are limited in how much Fish they can consume because of heavy metals, but DHA is really important for neurological development and brain development in babies. So when you take a lot of DHA, you get smart kids. Sources of DHA, omega-3 fatty acid, DHA. Cells, all the brain cells are made up of a fat layer. So when you consume optimal levels of DHA, you're creating healthy cell membranes that function well. They have better permeability, they transmit nutrients across them. So when one of the things when you're dealing with mental health, really across the board, memory, focus, concentration, but you want to have optimal levels of DHA in your diet. Memory, focus, ADHD, depression, anxiety, slowing dementia, anger, aggression. All these things improve when you give the brain a healthy amount. On a side note, one of the risks of taking a statin is it lowers your cholesterol levels, and therefore you're lowering your fats, and that's one of the reasons that dementia can be correlated with taking a statin. So there's always a balance between cardiovascular risk and dementia. Okay, what's the dosing? What does this actually mean? DHA dosing, 450 to 650 milligrams a day. Diet versus supplement, what does this look like? How do we put this into context? So what does 650 milligrams of DHA look like? Okay, salmon. So fatty fishes, not just salmon, but all fatty fishes, mackerels, have high levels of omega-3 in it. Now you're getting into farmed versus wild, but generally 3.5 ounces, a serving, 100 grams of salmon is 2.2 grams of omega-3, a combination of DHA and EPA. Of course, in nature, it's not going to be isolated, right? Things will usually go together. It's 2 servings a week. Alpha-linolenic acid. So what's the difference between alpha-linolenic acid and DHA? Alpha-linolenic acid comes from seeds and oils. It's the vegetarian source. It is an enzyme away from being the active form of DHA. You need vitamin B6 to convert it. So for people that are vegetarians or vegans who are not consuming animal products and they're doing flaxseed oil, chia seed oil, they need to make sure they're getting adequate vitamin B6 so they can actually turn it into the active form of DHA. A tablespoon of flaxseed oil is 7 grams of alpha-linolenic acid. Chia seeds, hemp seed, canola, omega fortified eggs. So a lot of times now when you're in the supermarket, things are fortified. So you might be able to get it through other food sources when they've added when they've fortified with it. Walnuts. A lot of times when they're making protein shakes, you can add ground hemp seeds, you can add ground chia seeds, you can add things to up your omega-3 intake. So omega-3 supplements versus diet. I want to sort of give a clarification. When we're healthy and we're optimal and we're just trying to maintain, diet usually works good. If we're in a disease state or a pathological state or something's already going on, diet's usually not going to be enough. You're usually going to have to supplement with. So this is why you would take fish oil capsules, why you would, Barlean's makes a lovely liquid. They make these emulsified oils that are really tasty. They're very palatable, as we'll talk about later, like, okay, how do you actually get kids to take these things? They make really lemon meringue, orange, blackberry, and they have many different types, so you can pick the ratio. EPA is really good for heart disease and cholesterol and anti-inflammatory. So there's other medicinal benefits. Again, I'm trying to keep this narrow to mental health. So usually there'll be a combination of EPA to DHA. Is it best to have a combination of all the above? Yeah, absolutely. Do you have fish? Do you have flaxseed oil? Do you do hemp? Do you include the different seeds and oils? Yeah, because you will draw different medicinal benefits from them. So rotation and variety is always key, but and the other thing is quality of fish oils matter. Do not buy the cheap fish oils because they will be rancid. Basically, the manufacturers of fish oil, there's like one main manufacturer. Nordic Naturals is a really good one. So you can think about the companies that make them and then they sell off to the next company, and they sell off to the next company. So when you get the really economical, cheap fish oil down here, it's usually the not as good quality. It might be more of the fish that might have the heavy metals or the toxins, the mercury. So quality of fish oil matters. And also when you smell it, and this is just a little consumer piece of information. Of course, fish oil is going to smell like fish, but oil, when it's rancid, has a certain smell that's a little bit different. It's off-putting. So if you smell something and you're like, so if you first open a bottle of fish oil, you smell it and kind of go, okay, this is fish oil. But over time, if it sits on the counter, it'll go rancid, and you never want to take a rancid oil. So then you would just toss that. So it smells like fish oil versus being rancid. The same with any of the seed oils. Usually they're best kept in the refrigerator to reduce their rancidity. So I mentioned that one before, diet versus not. Okay, carbohydrates, let's move on to the next one. Good carbohydrates, healthy carbohydrates. Not all carbohydrates are created equal. We need carbohydrates for energy. They fuel the ATP, the powerhouse of the cell. If you do not get enough carbohydrates, you're tired. We need the fiber. This is really, really important. The fiber that occurs in the fruits and the vegetables and in whole grains feed gut bacteria. And they also contain the minerals and the vitamins. Lots of variety of healthy carbohydrates. Brain use. Glucose for fuel. The brain prefers glucose for fuel. So that's why when you get hungry and you get tired, the body will naturally want sugar. The gut will use glutamine and will use other amino acids, but the brain wants glucose. So when we're stressed and tired, people crave sugar. It is a predictable pattern. But if you preventatively eat complex carbohydrates, you have good fats and proteins, you can kind of prevent this if this is your pattern. Healthy carbohydrates feed the bacteria. Gut bacteria plays such a vital role in our mental health. And how they get fed is through the starches and the carbohydrates that we eat. Gut bacteria, they keep our inflammation low. They synthesize our vitamins and minerals. They regulate our immune system. The gut microbiome, it's the ecology of the gut. It helps to optimize our neurotransmitters, specifically our serotonin. Gut bacteria change the neurotransmitters in the blood. And neurotransmitters play a role in our mood, depression, and anxiety. And of course, it prevents constipation. Pre and probiotics, food versus supplement. What's the difference between a pre and a probiotic? A prebiotic is like putting fertilizer in your garden. It's feeding the probiotics. The probiotics are actually the fermented or the actual bacteria. Fermented foods, one of the best ways to get probiotics. Kombucha, you can take supplements. Most cultures traditionally have a fermented food, whether it's yogurt, kimchi, sauerkraut. So around the world, there was always some sort of fermented foods because the fermented food feeds the gut bacteria and then has many, many health benefits. There's over 1 million strains of bacteria in the gut. Some are good, some are not good. So we always want to improve the good bacteria in the gut. Okay, protein. The building blocks. DNA, neurotransmitters, our muscles, our immune system, just to name a few. Okay, DNA, proteins broken down to amino acids, DNA synthesis, neurotransmitter synthesis. Neurotransmitters, chemical messengers that facilitate communication between the nerve cells. We have our stimulating neurotransmitters and our calming neurotransmitters. We need both. We need to work together. If we didn't have any stimulating neurotransmitters, we wouldn't get out of bed. We wouldn't make our deadlines. We wouldn't do our chores. Dopamine, epinephrine, norepinephrine, histamine, glutamate. Those are our stimulating neurotransmitters. Our calming neurotransmitters, serotonin, GABA, glycine, taurine. So that's a lot of times when you're looking at sleep aids and things to help people sleep at night, you'll see serotonin, you'll see GABA, you'll see glycine. Those affect the parasympathetic. The sympathetic is the fight or flight. That bear is chasing you in the woods, you gotta run. The calming is the parasympathetic. That's the rest, digest, sleep. Histamine. This is a important one because histamine is an excitatory neurotransmitter, and it can really increase anxiety, insomnia, hives, skin rashes. So seasonally, when people are reacting to plants and pollens and external, if you're also eating a diet of foods that are high in histamine, you're gonna up your histamine. So anybody with chronic health stuff or chronic sensitivity to histamine, the patients that I work with, I just teach them over the years. They learn what the high histamine foods are. I have a slide of those. So that if you're having a histamine reaction, you're not gonna be consuming strawberries, smoked meat, smoked cheeses, things that are higher in histamine, because it will excite the system. It will create more inflammation. Reducing high histamine foods in the diet, and you may consider some food sensitivity testing. I'll talk more about that in a bit. Okay, how much protein do you eat a day? Like, what is the actual number? So the basic formula is 0.36 grams per pound, but really that depends on activity level. You know, our 16-year-old male athletes that are trying to build muscle, they're gonna be doing 100 grams a day. You know, a 50-year-old female not lifting weights, 55 grams a day. Can you eat too much protein? Yes, you can eat too much protein. When protein is broken down, the kidneys have to filter it. If you're eating a lot of protein, too much protein, you put stress on the kidneys. But this can be checked in a simple blood draw, in a chemistry panel. Your kidney function test, your BUN, creatinine will be elevated. So I have seen that many times over the years. I've had parents send their kid to me and say, hey, I think they're eating too much protein. They're doing protein shakes, protein bars, protein, and they're eating 150, 200 grams of protein. Sure enough, I check their blood, their kidney function's off, and it's like, yep, you're right, they're eating too much protein, back it off. Plus, it can, for certain people, increase their risk of kidney stones. So you can eat too much protein. So it's always the sweet spot, right? Eating the right amount of protein. This is the list of the most common of high histamine foods. So smoked meats, certain fish, aged cheeses, strawberry, alcohol, fermented foods, so kombucha. So kombucha is great for the gut and it feeds the bacteria, but it's high histamine. So that's why there's no one size fits all. You start drinking a lot of kombucha and you think, oh, good, I'm working on my gut. You start ramping up your histamine and all of a sudden you're getting like itchy and hivey and a little bit anxious. Tomatoes, eggplant, citrus. There's the list. You can look up the list of high foods. I picked the most common because, of course, anything that has protein will eventually have histamine in it. Another tip on histamine, as meat degrades and breaks down, it will release more histamine. So for my super sensitive histamine patients, they go right to the butcher and they try and get the meat as fresh as possible and freeze it to prevent the histamine degradation. I mean, that's super extreme, but it does matter. So whenever you're shopping and you do your week shopping and you buy a bunch of meat, if you're not using it in 24 hours, freeze it because it will create more histamine. And then that's just more inflammatory in the body. So a tip on that one. Blood sugar and stress reaction. If you don't eat or you eat the wrong foods, highly processed, low nutrients, this can cause reactive low blood sugar. And in this response, you can become hangry. So we've all been there and we've all experienced people who get hangry. So basically, when our blood sugar, when your glucose gets below a certain level, the body's response is to tell the adrenal glands, little glands that live on top of the kidneys, hey, we need more glucose. It releases cortisol, which is a stress hormone. With that will go epinephrine and adrenaline, which is what creates that, racing heart, palpitations, irritability. And so you've created a whole stress response in the body just because you didn't eat or you didn't eat the right thing or you intentionally didn't eat. And this will create more stress on the system. And then usually people, when they do eat, they go to sugar because they have low blood sugar, and that just keeps the cycle going. So when we're dealing with teens or young adults or toddlers, anybody, you over time learn to predict this. Like, all right, they're going to school, or we're gonna go to a soccer game afterwards, or we have, you plan ahead, you bring them that snack, you put the little cooler, you try to prevent it so that they're not having an emotional breakdown and having a lot of anxiety or throwing a fit or having some depression when if we just didn't mess up the timing of the meal, we would have prevented a whole emotional escalation. So sometimes it can be something as simple as just making sure you planned the right meal and the right snack. Cortisol and, okay, that one I just talked about. Okay, this is a big topic. Celiac disease versus gluten sensitivity. So celiac disease is an autoimmune disease where our bodies attack the protein in grains that contain gluten, the gliadin protein, most common in wheat, rye, oats, and barley. Most oats now is pretty low gluten, so you can get a lot of gluten-free oats, but highest in wheat. So what happens is the immune system attacks the microvilli of the small intestine. These are these finger-like projections that absorb nutrients in the small intestine. So it is usually genetic, it is lifelong. If you have celiac, you are not going to be eating wheat for the rest of your life. How does that differ than gluten sensitivity? Gluten sensitivity is we can be sensitive to gluten, but not have an autoimmune disease against it. So it recruits different parts of the immune system. And this kind of feeds into food allergies versus food sensitivity. So just trying to give you some definitions so you can understand the lingo. Food allergy is your classic type 1, you eat peanuts, shellfish, dairy, your tongue swells, your mouth swells, you have difficulty breathing, you break out in hives. That's a type 1, that's a true allergy. A food sensitivity is a delayed reaction. You eat the food, and anywhere from 20 minutes to 3 days, you can produce an immune reaction in the body. So this can cause, joint pain, mood symptoms. I had a patient years ago who the gluten caused depression, and so they would eat it on Thursdays. They'd have pizza so that on Saturdays, when the symptoms kicked in, they could rest. And that was a personal choice they made. I was like, all right, fair enough. So that's a sensitivity, and sometimes they don't show up on blood tests, and I've been seeing this new pattern in the last couple years, because you test for all these things. Celiac is a blood test, but it's also an intestinal biopsy, and you're checking for the genetic markers. The gluten sensitivity you can check through blood, but it also comes up in a stool test where your intestines will actually be shedding immune markers against the gluten antibody. So sometimes you might go in and want to be tested for it, and they check one marker, and it comes up and they say, oh, you don't have it. But there's actually multiple markers that if you suspect or it runs in your family, there's a HLA gene that you can check to see if it runs in the family. And whenever that comes up on patients of mine, I'm like, you got to tell everybody in your family they all need to get checked, because you don't know who's got it, who doesn't. So why celiac's important? It affects your ability to absorb your vitamins, your minerals, your proteins, your fats, your carbohydrates, and so you become malnourished, malnutrition. And some people, they catch it early, it's no big deal. But even I've had patients who caught it early and they still spend the rest of their life like trying to work on their gut, they're trying to heal it. They're always, we test their vitamins, they're low in vitamin D, they're low in zinc, they're low in iron, and so they're constantly behind. And it's really hard, and then they struggle with anxiety and depression and focus, mental clarity, and it's coming from the celiac, and even when they're treating it. So that's the difference between celiac and gluten sensitivity. The treatment is still the same, you avoid gluten. But I like people to understand where it comes from, because that really makes a difference in how they make their choices in life, right? There's a whole lot different to be like, oh, I'm gonna feel a little bloated tomorrow versus my immune system's attacking my intestinal cells. Okay, the mitochondrial, so this is kind of the new information that's really being talked a lot about, is the role of mitochondrial in anxiety and depression. So mitochondrial, the powerhouse of the cell, ATP, Damage to our mitochondria through viruses, environmental toxicities, can create fatigue. So sometimes a lot of chronic fatigue, when you've ruled out all these other things, actually come from mitochondrial damage. There's a lot of long COVID, long haul, that have been correlated to mitochondrial damage. And so now you'll see a lot more talks and a lot of people talking about, okay, how do we heal the mitochondrial? How do you heal the cell so it works better? Partially reducing inflammation, so through the diet, through a lot of things we talked about, antioxidants, vitamin C, vitamin E, glutathione. These are nutrients that help to heal and restore the mitochondria. Ketosis. So this has been used a lot in, or has been used in some mental health crisis. So it's sort of, again, something that's come up a bit recently. So I just kind of want to talk about it in a broad sense. So what is ketosis? So ketosis, we first really learned about it with Atkins. Atkins was the first physician who was using it for weight loss, right? So if you consume, in an Atkins diet, you consume less than 20 grams, you can get there now at 25. But the Atkins diet was consume less than 20 grams of carbohydrates a day, and the body starts eventually using fat and protein for fuel. It increases your GABA, which is one of the calming parasympathetic neurotransmitters, and it reduces insulin. Insulin's quite inflammatory, so there's a role with that. So nowadays, it'll be used in a lot of neurological diseases or in mental health, of course, for weight loss because of its role. It does a lot of things, but it really can kind of get the system going. Of course, with weight loss, metabolic syndrome, it can be part of that. Okay, methylation. This is pretty common and well known now. Methylation, 5-MTHF, methyl tetrahydrofolate. It's involved in DNA transcription. And there are two main genetic mutations that you look for. A lot of this can be done through blood. Most of the time I do it through saliva. There are different labs now that do it. A lot of times people were doing it through either ancestry or genetic, but some people, there are some psychiatric labs that will do it. So C677T and 1298C, for each mutation that you have, there's a 33% reduction in the body's ability to methylate. Methylation is a biochemical process. It deals with our neurotransmitters. It deals with histamine metabolism. It deals with detoxification. So if people have a methylation mutation, they need to take the active form of folate, and that's lifelong. You have a mutation, you take it, and you want to avoid synthetic folate because your body can't metabolize it. Most of the supplement industry now, all the folate will be, it'll be various versions of 5-MTHF, folinic acid, folinase. Folic acid is sort of being phased out. Most of the ways that we would get folic acid would be through the food industry. So you would get it in breads, you'd see it, they'll have folic acid. But if people have, one mutation, most of us have one mutation. It's the 2 to 4 mutations where people kind of really need to avoid a lot of the extra synthetic acid, extra folic acid, because they can't break it down. They can't metabolize it, and therefore it's going to create more anxiety, more depression because of a pathway that's being pushed too quickly in the body. Naturally, it's found in green leafy vegetables. So if we include things in our diet, lettuce and broccoli, cauliflower, asparagus, having green leafy vegetables, which isn't easy for kids, right? But in adults, or if you include it, you're already just giving your body some extra support for methylation. So,
So I'm sorry, but I got a little lost. Methylation is a process? And
Right.
folate is something that...
well, it's one of the things that methylation does, is it converts synthetic folate to active folate. So if you have a genetic defect, you can't convert it. So if you're taking exogenous forms, it's toxic to the body because genetically you don't do it well, and therefore you can't methylate well.
And why do you want to process folate? Why does the body want to?
Well, folate is involved in DNA transcriptase. So basically back to making DNA, which is why it's been put in prenatals. So folic acid to prevent spina bifida. And so there always has to be 800 micrograms of folic acid in prenatal vitamins so that babies don't get, the spinal cord closes. But if people don't methylate and can't convert it, that folic acid isn't doing them any good. So nowadays you'll see prenatals that actually have the methylated version. They don't always take out the folate because I think they still think there's some role. And it really just depends on people's genetics. If people have a genetic mutation, they don't methylate, they have increased risk of blood clots and they have miscarriages. So there's a whole other side note there. Oh, I had another slide on it. So if you have a genetic mutation, you may need to supplement. I talked about the mutation. Methylfolate, 5-MTHF, between 1,000 and 1,500 micrograms a day. Also methylated B12, about 1,200. You may see really high dosing of it. You may have been recommended in multiple. You might see 1 milligram, 5 milligram, 10 milligrams. I don't usually dose that high. I'm not a, for the methylated folate, I usually find that if people are doing consistently, they're trying to include dietary stuff, and maybe they take one, usually have like one pill that'll be a methylated B12 and folate, usually that's enough. So, and sometimes I'll have people that their practitioner maybe put them on a higher dose, and it agitates them. It can make people more anxious. So more is not always necessarily better for methylation. And you gotta go slow, because if you start methylating too quickly, people usually feel terrible, like joint pain and achiness, because they haven't been doing it properly most of their lives. So the holistic mental health approach, there are many tools to help us live a happy and fulfilled life. And when life gets stressful and complicated, just let us not forget the basics. You know, sometimes we always have to roll it back in and be like, all right, what am I doing? Let me go back to my diet. Let me clean it up. Am I eating enough fish? Am I eating fish oil? Am I getting enough protein? Am I eating too much sugar? Am I consuming too many things that have low nutrients? One of the, an interesting thing about that I read this week about drinking a lot of bottled water and filtered water now and not having tap water as much is we're losing some of the minerals. And so sometimes we're getting a little bit more mineral deficiency because we're drinking bottled water, because we're trying not to drink the toxic stuff in the water. So, you know, there's a little bit of a no-win situation. So but there are some, that's where the specialty lab testing comes in. So if people are curious, like, am I mineral deficient? Do I need more of this? Do I need more of that? That's where the functional medicine, that's where the specialty labs come in, where you can actually test these things to find out if you need them. All right, perfect, all right.
We are going to have our panelists.
My name is Joanne Sapler. I am a pediatric dietitian. I got my master's degree in clinical nutrition from Tufts University School of Nutrition. I moved from Chicago to Boston to study under a nutrition guru, Dr. Johanna Dwyer, who was a professor at Harvard University. You may have heard of her name. She's older now, but she was done thousands of papers in nutrition. She was also the clinical director of my internship program at the Francis Stern Nutrition Center in Boston. I have spent the last about 35 years in pediatrics. The last 32 years I have worked as a dietitian and a feeding therapist with the Minuteman Early Intervention Program here in Concord. I am a registered dietitian, and I am licensed to practice in Massachusetts. I tell families every time I work with them, I don't know everything, but if there's anything I do know, it's a little bit about nutrition. It's what I've spent my life learning about. My profession tends to be very judgy. I sometimes have to encourage families to meet with me because they think I had a mom say, oh, if I'd known you were a dietitian, I would have had a fruit bowl out, you know. I'm very moderate, I'm very middle of the road. I believe very strongly in the Hippocratic Oath, first do no harm. And so I see part of my role with families as kind of a gatekeeper. I think all of this information is very interesting. My work tends to be very practical. I am in people's homes every day. I've been in hundreds of homes in 9 towns in this area and Hanscom Air Force Base. And so the more information that I can get, the more I can share with families, but I do it in a very realistic way.
Okay, thank you. So my name is Stephanie Kreisberg. I'm a clinical psychologist. I have a practice here in Concord, and I just want to say thank you to Dr. Hodges and CPAC for including me in this panel. And I've been doing this for a long time, 30 years, and I work with kids and teenagers and adults, specializing in the treatment of anxiety disorders. I also have a very weird little specialty working with daughters of narcissistic mothers. And I wrote a book called, a couple years ago, called Adult Daughters of Narcissistic Mothers. So people come to me with various issues related to that. And so when Karen asked me to be on this panel, I thought, well, I don't know that much about nutrition, but per se, but people come to me a lot with issues related to, their kid is very, picky eater, or they're struggling a lot around meals. And I've been thinking a lot since you called me about what I could sort of bring to the table here, and what I find that parents often, bring to the table, bring to my office around eating. And, I've been thinking just a lot about how, we all have our own, triggers and issues, from our own pasts about food and weight and body image. And that's just something also just to bear in mind. So being the psychologist here, that's maybe something that we could, think about, because this is great information. And I know as I was listening to you, I was thinking, oh my gosh, I have up on a statin, and oh no, and so my husband has inflammation, and all the different things I want to address, and how do we also manage our anxiety when we get new information, and how do we work it into our lives. And so, because we get a lot of information, and how do we take what's valuable and also, manage all the information that we get. So you may see me in your office, so, so that's.
Which is key. I mean, one of the things I've learned just from being in clinical practice for almost 25 years is you don't do it all at once. Mm-hmm. It's overwhelming. You give somebody one thing to do. Sometimes I'm like, okay, let's just get you, I spend a lot of time talking about blood sugar. I give them glucose monitors, not for diabetes, just so they can understand like how they feel, and is that a low blood sugar reaction or is that a high blood sugar reaction, and how can you change your diet? So it's the psychological feedback for adults, mostly for this one, the psychological feedback of like, oh, wow, I just ate that and my blood sugar just jumped up to 180 and it took 4 hours to come down. Like, okay, whereas if I ate this, my blood sugar didn't do that, and then I wasn't tired and I didn't get a headache afterwards. Mm-hmm. So a lot of times, it's just like one change at a time so people can implement it, so there's not this like anxiety, and people don't like to take your food away. So if you do food sensitivity testing, people get very anxious about that. I can't eat my favorite foods. And so unless they feel terrible, and most of the times at that point they're like, I don't care, I'll do whatever it takes.
I think that's really good to know, because I think there can be this back and forth between feeling, wow, this is going to be really helpful to me, but also, people can also feel overwhelmed, right? And
I think especially in my work, since COVID, It has been a dramatic change. At least half of the kids that I work with now eat in front of a screen. And I understand that, and I try to be sympathetic to that. If you are, during COVID, trying to do a Zoom meeting with your boss, you don't care what your kid is eating, just stay off the screen, you know? And so kind of bringing that back, any change, and we talked about that, any change is better than no change. And if it's not something doable, I mean, my first goal often in a visit is just to get invited back. Because again, they often think I'm the food police and that I'm gonna come in and judge who they are or what they look like or what their kids are doing, et cetera. And when you go into a home, you can really see what's going on, you know? And that's helpful, it's not a judgment. So sometimes my first goal is he has to sit down and eat the goldfish crackers, not carry the bag around the house all day. And it's not maybe what I would hope for, but it's the reality of what we have to work with. And any change is better than no change at all. And I applaud parents for doing that. Like I said, I've been doing this work for 35 years, and the difference in the stress level today than what it was 20 or 30 years ago is night and day. I used to work with moms who were home all day. We've got two parents working at home, and often they're in the same house now, competing for what room they can work in, with kids running around and having different activities and different behavioral challenges, and social media that one person is telling you one thing and somebody's telling you something else, and oh, by the way, your mother-in-law suggested this, and your own mom says that, and your neighbor. I mean, it's just overwhelming. When I have a 36, 32, and 29-year-old children now, adults. When they were young, if you had said to me, Google that, you would have thought it was a board game. You know, and so there's more information, but there's a lot of crap out there too, that sometimes helping parents navigate what's good information and what isn't, what's doable and what isn't, because it can be so disheartening if you feel like you have to make all of these changes. And all you're trying to do is get to 7 o'clock so you can put them to bed, you know, so.
Nope.
For the audience to start asking questions, go ahead and raise those hands.
Sure, go ahead.
So I just playing up, developing off what you just said, I work with children also, and I think that parents have, I'm speaking for myself, so I'm not trying to single out parents, shame around, a lot of times they don't want to admit what's happening with their kids with food if your kids are not good eaters, because it's like, you know, hey, the only thing I can get them to eat is mac and cheese, so after 19 battles, this is what we're eating, and foods, and as a provider, parents are often telling me that food is a really big issue, and I feel like it's gotten to be a bigger issue.
It is.
And I live it every day in my house as well, and so, and I think, I'm curious to see, and also there's a piece where working with kids with neurodevelopmental issues that have ADHD and anxiety, and they're already, and learning disabilities, and they're already prone to these food sensitivities, and sort of trying to figure out how to help them, and that these changes can help mitigate anxiety or attentional issues, but also that these challenges can also make it harder to implement the intervention. I sometimes feel like you're kind of stuck that way because you're trying to get them to eat, they won't eat anything, they have food sensitivities because they have ADHD or they have autism, so you're kind of in this almost double bind. I don't know if you feel that way, or if you can offer a perspective about when families are feeling this way. And I think it probably got worse during the pandemic. That's what I feel like it got worse during the pandemic.
Well, you are not alone. Pretty much most parents come to probably all of us with that. And definitely a lot of the things I talked about are way easier for adults than it is for kids. And so you're the one actually in the house who has to deal with where the rubber meets the road on this one. But just sort of saying, yeah, it is really hard. And sometimes it's one change you make, and what I do is like we make one change, And then we give it some time, like a month, and then we see, okay, what can we, and kids wind up doing a lot of vitamin gummies. So yeah, they're getting the sugar from the gummy, but we're able to at least get some nutrients in. So that's.
But then you got to worry about brushing their teeth.
Yep, and then you got,
So there's always that, sometimes you feel like you're trading something for something else.
absolutely.
We sunscreen our kids like crazy now, which we didn't when I was a kid. But now we have greater vitamin D deficiencies. So you're always looking at that. I think one of the things, and just one of the primary things I look at when I go into a home is this child getting hungry? Because we talk about the brain, when Johns Hopkins and a lot of research institutions are doing wonderful work on what they call the first brain and the second brain, which is the digestive tract. And in some of this research, what they're finding is, that when they talk to each other, right, kids don't eat if they're not hungry. And so one of the primary things that I see in my work is that the brain and the tummy, as I call it to the parents, right, they talk to each other. The hunger signal goes off, and you put in a few goldfish crackers, and it shuts down, but not for very long. And so you spend he eats all day long, right? But you spend the entire day shutting that signal off, but not getting full. And so most of my work has to do with, let's start by getting hungry. I have a friend I was in grad school with who has worked all over the world in public health. And she emailed me from some small country in Africa, I'd never heard of it. And she said, picky eating is an American disease. Kids in Africa that I'm working with, they don't throw food, they don't reject food, they eat it. And so hunger is the beginning of that. And I think if we can bring in some of these other aspects of healthy eating and make it simple enough that we don't give somebody a headache and they throw the whole thing out and say, I don't know, just eat the fish sticks.
Yeah. I like the work of, you may be familiar with her, of Ellen Satter.
I love her.
Yes.
She's my number one.
Yeah.
Yes.
And Ellen Satter, I really recommend you go to her website. Oh, you're shaking your heads. Ellen, Ellyn, S as in Sam, Atter. And she's died. Well, I don't think she's alive anymore.
Yes, she is.
Oh, she's still alive?
She's in
Okay.
Wisconsin. She's
Okay.
my Bible.
Okay.
The book that I give to every baby shower is called Child of Mine, Feeding with Love and Good Sense.
Yes.
But she's written a lot of books. She is a clinical dietitian, and she is a therapist. And she has a clinic, and she is absolutely the best in feeding that I know of.
Right,
So,
and
yeah.
her philosophy is, which really is very psychological, because she also started to specialize in eating disorders and ran therapy groups, is that it's a parent's job, and you can build on this, you know more about it than I do, to put out the food at certain times in a structured way, and to have meal times be pleasant,
you
and
can,
to
yeah.
and to model, enjoying eating food. And this is what kind of blew my mind. And guess what? It's the child's job to decide how much to eat and what they eat. And that they will figure out how much to eat for them, and ultimately what their body size is going to be. How big or small it is, which I think is a really important thing, because I think larger body sizes can be very triggering, in our culture. So I think that is a really good resource to go to. Just Google her name, and the website is amazing.
I'm sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead.
She talks about the division of
The
responsibility.
division of responsibility, right.
She says a parent decides what's offered, when it's offered, and where. That's your job as a parent. It's a child's decision if they're going to eat it and how much. They're more likely to do that if they're hungry and if there is good role modeling. And if you look at all the well-done research on feeding, it is continuous passive exposure to food. Don't talk about it. Don't try to pressure it. You were talking about if you can get a kid to eat something
Right.
or take an omega-3 or
Right.
something. Who cares what's in it if they won't eat it, right? And then you get into a battle that usually is not worth fighting. But if you role model it, I had a mom not long ago tell me that she called me the day after they had a dinner, and she said, I'm working with a 2-year-old and she has a 6-year-old. They're at dinner, and she called me and said, so last night I decided to role model eating broccoli. And she said, I said, oh, this is so delicious. It's green and pretty. It looks like little trees. I love my broccoli. And she said, finally, her 6-year-old put his fork down and said, Mommy, then just eat it. And she said, I realized I kind of went over the top with that. Don't talk, it's hard to do. Don't really talk about it. But model what you think is healthier eating without the expectation that children are going to. And, you know, children are, I mean, again, that's my specialty is children, but they're very resilient. Kids grow up in abject poverty and they end up winning the Nobel Peace Prize or something, you know. So it's not quite as fragile as we sometimes think it is.
Yeah, yeah. And I think the other thing is to think about, you know, I'm thinking as a psychologist about, you know, what pressures you bring in from the outside world, from your past, about your own relationship with food or eating. And, you know, I had one family say to me today, oh, my mother said to me, oh, it'd be really nice if the kids ate Thanksgiving food this year instead of, you know, fish sticks. And, you know, the mother just...
That's helpful.
Right. You know, so you get a lot of pressure from other sources. And, you know, just how do you kind of keep to your own values, what matters to you, and that mealtimes be a time of really connection. So versus, you know, a battlefield. So.
The gentleman back there?
When you were going over the idea of the methylated supplements, you had mentioned that if you take it too quickly, it causes kind of an adverse reaction, inflammation, fatigue, et cetera. Can you give me an idea of like how long the titration should be up and why would taking supplements that are supposed to be processed correctly by the body cause this adverse event? It kind of seems counterintuitive.
The best way to think about it is it's a freeway and side streets. So if the freeway is blocked and then all the cars get off and kind of go to the side streets. So what happens in the methylation process is if you have genetic, you haven't done this methylation process very well at all, so your body's been using these side pathways to do it, these other biochemical pathways to do it, and then all of a sudden you start pushing the pathway, it flares it up. So all of a sudden and so I've seen this over the years where someone starts taking a practitioner put them on 5 milligrams of methylated folate, and all of a sudden they started having panic attacks and their joints started hurting and everything got really achy, and so they had to, because it was pushing the pathway that hadn't been working over the years too quickly. So, no, that's why I always do low dosing, but I was just pointing out that a lot of practitioners will give people really high dosing, and I have not seen that to be clinically necessary. And can actually cause an aggravation of why people are actually taking the supplement to begin with. So I'm much more of a, 1 to 2,000 milligram, 1 to 2 milligram microgram, 1 to 2 milligram dosing. Very often less is more. They're water soluble, you're peeing them out. They need to be, the B vitamins, we need to constantly replenish because they don't stay in the body, not like vitamin D, A, or E, the fat soluble that, you can take less D, higher dose, less frequent because your body will store it, but with the B vitamins. And it also depends on, does everybody with a methylation defect have to take it? Not necessarily, but if you're in a high demand stressful state and you're showing symptoms that might relate to it, then yes.
Hi, I have
My Oprah moment.
Oh, thank you. I have 2 adult children. They're both in college right now. And I'm really looking for some practical and kind of realistic first steps. Both are neurodiverse and, suffer all the coexisting conditions. But it's one of these things, I have a background in food science, and I have probably done all the what not to do's about talking up food. And so they're kind of don't really want to hear this from me, but I would love to know, like, since I'm not at the dining common and I'm not in their lives for most of the time, what could be some, like, a first step to kind of bring them down this path? Or to a more balanced eating and so forth? Does that make sense?
Anybody? Yeah, no, I'm following. Instead of
Yeah.
the freshman 20, coming home with the freshman 20.
Yeah.
They're losing weight actually, because they're kind of living off of macaroni and cheese.
Right, so I guess the first question is like, do they have any access to cook for themselves? Can they cook for themselves, or they only have cafeteria food? And so then,
Micro fridge, so they have a microwave and then they have the dining common.
do they have a freezer where they can freeze some stuff?
They do.
Right. So they might be getting them a few frozen things too that they could make. You know, you could probably, either you could make when they're home and freeze for them, or teach them. You know, if they're college, so you want to make sure they're getting some real food. They're going to be hungry. They're going to want protein. So probably finding good quality chicken breasts or something that's frozen, maybe cooked, but you can heat up, or meat, or you know, some dishes like that. So they're getting like protein. I think mostly with the college kids, it's really trying to avoid a lot of the empty calories that'll come with just like the ramens and the, you know, the quick fix. So I'd probably find some frozen foods that are good that they'll eat, right? You probably go to Trader Joe's, maybe if you're gonna see them over Thanksgiving holiday, maybe try a couple things, go to Trader Joe's, go to Whole Foods, go to a couple different places and see what sort of options. Check out the labels, you know, if there's less just junky stuff in it, like high fructose corn syrup, artificial colors, you know, but as you said, if it's what they eat. So you want it fast, you want to be able, maybe burritos, breakfast burritos, frozen sausages, things that would be quick and go to for like breakfasts, soups, maybe some good soups. Just watch the sodium content in soups. I don't know if they would heat up a soup, or the instant ones, like the soups. Do you guys have some?
Can I ask, are they concerned? Or is it you?
No, they're not, but, they're not, but at the same time, they're complaining of headaches, they're complaining of joint pains, they're complaining of being overly stressed. I mean, they're voicing all these things. They aren't yet at the point where they're starting to put it together, like food and so forth. One of them actually has alexithymia, so that they don't recognize when they're hungry. They recognize that they're nauseous, but they don't relate that to the fact that they didn't eat all night.
Right.
Okay.
And sometimes that can help if there's kind of a structure. This is when we were talking about Ellen Satter, when we say a parent decides what's offered where and when. It can work the same way for adults. That I have a friend going through chemo right now and has no real appetite, but she takes a meal, even when she's not hungry, as almost like a medication, right? And so sometimes it can work to talk about the structure of eating, that it's been 3 hours, and even putting it on your phone or something and saying, I'm going to have something now because it's going to help. And if it does help, it motivates to keep doing it. But it has to be something they want to do. Otherwise, I know, I raised 3 kids like, yeah, okay, Mom.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know.
And I would also add, you said this is their first year in college?
Yes.
Yes, okay, so that's a big adjustment, and it's still new, and so it takes, you know, time. And if they're, and I would just maybe try to have sort of an open-ended conversation with them about it, sort of like, you know, the cafeteria or the dining commons, like what's that like? And I'm a big believer in questions or statements, something like, gosh, sometimes, have you seen the dining common?
Yes, I've eaten at it many times.
Yeah, so maybe knowing what it's like, you know, it's got a lot of stations, it's really big. I get that some students find it a little overwhelming, or just kind of these statements more than questions, because I know I have 2 daughters in their 20s, you know, the questions are like, you know, so I find more sort of statements they might respond to more. So in other words, finding out maybe what their experience of it is, and then they might say, oh, it's so noisy, or it's so crowded, and that might lead you down a path of gentle, kind of problem solving. Okay, and I'm a big believer just saying like, wow, it's crowded at 12 o'clock. Like, yeah, and kind of taking it from there in a sort of really gentle way and helping them kind of connect the dots,
Yeah.
okay?
Protein shakes or also like either pre-made or giving them a protein powder if they'll make a protein shake are a good one too. Dorm-friendly stuff.
My youngest son, who's 29, has had mental health issues for most of his life. And he used to call me from college. He was in a fraternity. He's 6'3", and a 6'3" man doesn't cry in front of his frat brothers. So he would call me from the stairwell. And we would talk about things. My brother, who we've just talked about, is a psychologist that I'm familiar with. And my brother would always talk about HALT, hungry, angry, lonely, tired. Mm-hmm. Maybe you've heard of that. And I would ask him, when was the last time you ate? Are you mad about something? When was the last time you were out socializing? Mm-hmm. How much sleep are you getting? And sometimes you start with those basic things before you move on to something bigger. And just say, and I would say to him, because he was at Gettysburg College and it was eight hours away. And I was ready at any moment to get in the car to go down there, because there were times when I thought I needed to. And I would say, I'm going to hang up. You need to go get something to eat. If you do not call me back in an hour, I'm driving down. It was like, no! And so sometimes it's those kinds of, basic things of just kind of going through. And I've done it with why do I have a headache? Because I didn't eat yet today. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
For my youngest, who's 15, once she hit puberty and her sensitivity to textures and tastes in food escalated along with her teenage defiance. When she was young, grilled salmon, spaghetti and meatballs, you could really coax. I was able to, but as a teenager, cannot coax. And her go-to is sugar, carbs, as soon as she gets picked up between school and the next activity, just sugar, carbs. To the point where her eating, she really has a hard time picking a dinner menu that she would be happy with, because she's forgotten how much she used to love broccoli, And we do the modeling thing, fill the table with fruits and vegetables. But you can't fight with them. So you can't bribe them. You're not like who was it? Put the pureed broccoli in the brownies. You can't do any of that stuff that you did when
Jessica Seinfeld started.
Seinfeld,
Right.
yeah.
Didn't work.
Doesn't work.
I spent 2 hours and I got a quarter cup of squash and a pan of brownies. Why?
Yeah.
Or I was doing that with the spaghetti sauce, putting all kinds of stuff in the spaghetti sauce.
Yeah.
But, I've heard the term chaining, try to chain
Food
them
chaining.
back.
Food chaining.
No, to, instead of just a piece of candy, a chocolate-covered banana piece, but teenagers, you can't play games like that. So how
They're
can you
onto
make even that first step to make one change, even one change?
ahead.
I would have you start.
Well, first thing I would look at is how much focus is on her. The second, anxiety goes up, appetite and interest go down. So I don't know, but that's the, and go down. Think about if you were about to take a big exam. Would you feel like having a meal? So, and I see this in little children, but I also have a private practice with older children who will tell me that they don't, appetite goes away. If you're anxious about something, if somebody rear ends me, I don't want a sandwich while I'm waiting for the police, And that's really what a lot of even teenagers can say. So often it's counterintuitive because the more important it is to you, the more you probably need to just back off, okay? If you could get her to take a vitamin, it would be a nice consolation, right? But if you feel, and parents are the only ones who can figure this out, if you feel that there's too much focus, it's the broccoli mommy story, right? If you feel like, and she's onto you, if she's smart enough, she knows what you're doing, right? Even if you pretend, she is more likely to be amenable to doing something different, especially if she's thinking at all about her health. But lecturing doesn't work. Role modeling sometimes doesn't work. I remember thinking my daughter was going to permanently have her eyes rolled to the back of her head every time I talked to her. That she got over that, right? But some of this stuff is you can only do so much at her age. And even you can address eating disorders, but I used to work with some kids with eating disorders, and one of the girls I worked with in the morning would get up before her family, and she'd put a bowl with a tiny bit of milk and like 3 Cheerios in it, and a spoon in the sink. So when her mother asked her, did you have breakfast today? Oh yeah, I had Cheerios. And it looked like she had. So, human beings are pretty smart. Little kids are pretty smart, And I wish there's no magic to it, but I do think, and you want to address both of you, but generally the starting point is backing off enough. It's important to you, so back off and let her, and she might at some point start talking to you about it too. How's her weight?
Not good because she eats sugar and carbs.
Yeah.
Does she have her period?
Yes.
Okay.
So once you hit puberty.
Okay, so she's got enough fat in her diet, okay, all right.
And one thing that I would add to this, often as parents, what we do is, when our child is having a problem, especially if it seems to be anxiety related in some way, because we love them and we're empathetic, we do things that wind up actually inadvertently almost reinforcing the behavior, like we'll cook extra meals, or we'll really I know I did it, we'll stand on our heads to make things better. And so, and it's just something that we do out of love. So one thing that you might, try is just saying, every night, you make the family meal, a healthy family meal, and it's along the lines of this, and you just let her know. Listen, from now on, this is going to be our family dinner, and we're going to make this, and we're not going to be having anything else for dinner, and kind of put it on the table. And then again, let her eat it or
not.
Or not eat it. But tell her, you might tell her, but I'm not going to be giving anything else because I don't think that's healthy for you. And then just let her choose whether she eats it or not. Are you concerned that then she might go and just get other?
Then it turns into a tantrum. You don't have any food that I like.
Okay.
So I end up cooking a different meal.
Oh, okay.
And she'll just, nothing is good here. I don't like any of this healthy food unless something's sweet.
Oh, okay. So I've heard that a million times. It's so common. And so one thing I'm just suggesting that might be often what we have to do with our kids, even when they're teenagers, is kind of, we call it in psychology, selective ignoring. And just kind of it's really hard as a parent, really hard. I still have a hard time with it. And just kind of be like, okay. And really stick to your guns about not preparing another meal. And I don't mean this to be a therapy session. And sometimes things get worse before they get better. But what it does is it gives her structure. It gives her and you also have to let her know this part is key. You want a balance of empathy and validating her feelings, but also kind of a firmness of limits around it. And
We do the same thing with 2-year-olds. We talk a lot about picky eating. Parents will say to me, do you want to know what he eats now or what he used to eat? Recommending family-style dinners, eating together as often as possible, passive, continuous exposure to foods, and making sure that everybody at the table has what we call a food friend. And that might be for her a sugared cereal or something. That there is something there, we're not making a separate meal. We're all sitting here. What our family's having is what's here. And if all she wants is a small amount of something, but you make sure there's something there that's going to draw her to the table, and then you don't talk about it, which is really hard. Yeah. And that's kind of how you start. Yeah.
I was wondering if each of you, first of all, I love the focus on not over-accommodating and really having to kind of suffer through their suffering that Dr. Kreisberg was bringing up. I thought that was really important. The question that I have, wonder if each of you could talk about the role of role models, mentors, coaches. Like I've noticed that a lot of the conversation, it feels as though there's sort of like a child and a parent in a lot of these scenarios. And the parent is holding a lot of this on their own in relation to the child. And so I'm wondering if you guys could talk about just your own experience, seeing or observing coaches, role models, mentors. Certainly pre-adolescence, we know that's an important time for all kids to have that kind of influence as they're starting to differentiate more and more from their parents while they still need them tremendously. So could you guys touch on that, please?
Yeah, I'll start. And this actually was going to be my response to your question anyway, because a lot of times my role in this is the parent sends the kid to me and we do labs. And then I spend 30, 45 minutes going over their labs with them. And then we talk about what does their glucose look like? What does their insulin look like? What is their cortisol? And sometimes it's a little above their head, but sometimes it's a repeated conversation because I'm seeing them multiple years in a row. And so we've removed the parent from this scenario. Now I'm, as the healthcare provider, as an objective, non-emotional trigger, giving them education about, oh, wow, you already have pretty high cholesterol for your age. Wow, your sugars are a little high. How can we work on this? And then I come at it from a much more medical, not emotional, not triggering perspective. And education, as you can tell my style, I'm really big on education because if people don't understand why they're doing it, they don't want to do it. If you understand like, oh, I'm going to eat this, my blood sugar is going to go up, my pancreas is going to tell my insulin to go up, then that's going to drop, and then I'm going to feel it, and then I'm going to get a headache. That's a very different scenario than mom thinks I eat too much sugar. So that's one of the ways as a coach style from my perspective. And I've been so surprised by kids. I've had, kids that came in that either I diagnosed or their pediatrician diagnosed it with celiac at the age of like 8. And they're angelic and like, okay, I can't eat that anymore. Okay. And they're super open to it. And then, even teenagers that have been embracing of dietary changes, because they feel terrible. So sometimes there is an element of when the kid starts feeling really bad, it does evoke a survival skill of like, okay, even I know I'm gonna have to pull out gluten in my diet, or, for example, for women, for girls, for teenage girls, there's a condition called polycystic ovarian, which is, they're born with it. The ovaries produce too much hormones, and it is related to insulin resistance, so they tend to be heavier, they tend to have metabolic issues, they tend to struggle with their cycles, and so I usually diagnose that pretty early because I look for it in all my young girls. And that becomes a big conversation about why can't you eat the way your best friend can eat because she's skinny as a rail, and how's this hormones, and how do we work with this, and how do you not develop an eating disorder while you're trying to take them through food eliminations or so yeah, so that's one of the ways I've from my skill set managed it.
And, you know, I would just say about that, no matter what's going on with, you know, their food or their eating, you know, we just all know that everybody, whether you're a kid or a teenager or an adult, you know, needs what I think a psychologist, Robert Brooks, called an island of competence. You know, somewhere in their life where they feel, you know, good about what they're doing, they feel competent. It's so important. So, and it doesn't have to be like, you know, they're a superstar soccer player. You know, they could just be really good at playing, you know, Monopoly with their friends. It can be, it doesn't have to be some big thing. So, but if they are connected, or even just connected with the next door neighbor who they go and they hang out with and they walk dogs together, or maybe they do have a skill that they're good at and they feel really connected to their, you know, violin teacher. But yes, just someone that they have a relationship with, who they feel that they matter to, is a very, what we call a protective factor. So that's a really important thing for, I think, all our kids to have. In fact, I think for all us grown-ups to have too.
In my work, the first thing is, how old are they? If they're old enough to talk to me, really talk to me, I ask them what their concerns are. Sometimes it's just, my mother made me come. Children, no matter what the age, do not want to disappoint their parents. And sometimes I see just this really sadness about, I wish I could eat better. I know my mom would be so happy. Or my dad gets mad at me and says, your mother worked hard at this meal. You know, which, what does it do? It makes everything worse, of course. It's well-intentioned. All of this is born out of love and anxiety and fear about what's going to happen with your kid. But depending on that, sometimes I'll talk about, are you playing a sport, or are you, I have a little guy I'm working with right now who's a really good basketball player, but he's now traveling with his team places, and he doesn't want to be bringing his own food. So we're working on even something like, the team is stopping at McDonald's. Let's figure out what you can have there, you know? As a dietitian, am I thrilled with McDonald's? No, but I believe in moderation, and I really believe in socialization, right? So, you know, that kind of a thing that can reduce some anxiety. And often it's role modeling, not by the parents necessarily, but it's by somebody else in their environment. And trying to figure out, again, the age, are they motivated by the fact that, you know, if you don't eat, you don't have the energy that you might have, that maybe you're old enough, you're still laying down bone tissue. You're still developing your brain. And if they can own that, again, depending on the age, a 2-year-old doesn't think that way. They just want what they want when they want it. And that's where, for a parent, sometimes that role modeling, I'm not a believer in feeding clinics, basically. I think that a therapist gets in a kid's face, and what happens? That anxiety goes up, appetite goes down. I believe let's all chill out and maybe we see this in early intervention where I work. We have play groups, and I've seen they have snack at play group, and they're at a little table, and this little kid's watching, that other kid asks for another pretzel, and so he starts eating one, you know? And often that's what happens. But we have to focus on that we're planting seeds. And the harvest of this stuff often comes later. And we want to plant those seeds deep and well in a healthy way so that these kids might want to try something. And if and when they do, you don't say, see, I told you you'd like it. I don't believe in take one bite. I don't believe in any of that stuff. I've tried it over the years. I've learned a lot. And I think the role modeling piece is, first of all, that you love your kid no matter what they eat or don't eat, you know, and that it's available if they ever want to try it. I made a mistake with my son, my middle kid once, that he came to, I made my kids, 3 of them, Rules at dinner, you have to come to the table. You can't say yuck. You can't throw food. You can't take food off of other people's plates. We tried to talk about anything but food. And Richard wouldn't, said he was mad at me. I had done something that every other parent allowed their kid to do, right, except me. And so we're sitting at dinner, and he wouldn't eat, and he wouldn't eat. And finally, he was hunger, and he took some. And I said, see, I knew you'd like it. Shut him down, completely shut him down. Learned a huge lesson. Shut up. Just look over and go, oh, I think he's eating it. Yeah. But one of the things that I have found over the years too is that we sometimes have this expectation, and the reality is way over here. And if we can narrow that gap and just say, hey, my kid is actually liking to sit at the table, or dinner doesn't make all of us cry anymore, it's a huge step. And gradually those changes. I tell parents all the time, it's like daylight. You don't notice that today is a minute less light than yesterday, but you notice the difference between today and July. And if you can look at that with role modeling anything, that if we look back and say, well, 6 months ago, he didn't even want to come to the table. Or 6 months ago, she was only eating something, right? If possible, like with your daughter, if you really think there are big gaps, I would try to negotiate a vitamin. The best form of any absorbable nutrient is always in food. But if that's not working, I take calcium, I don't want to break a hip. So that would be something, can we negotiate that? And I'll get off your back. Sure.
Yes.
Thank you. So, sorry, I've been trying to think about how to ask this question because somebody else mentioned their children who were neurodivergent, and I think there's some, sorry, I'm just wondering, in terms of the supplements, right, and we talk about diet, my kids actually eat really well, and I'm very thankful for that. We haven't tried any supplements. I'm just curious in your practice, specifically you more, but I'd love to hear from everyone if you have opinions. In terms of kids having issues in school, right, with focus, with concentration, they have an ADHD diagnosis perhaps. Have you seen cases where sort of these supplements or changes can really alleviate those sort of coexisting issues that the child is having, in addition to, or maybe even instead of medication? And that, I hope that question is clear.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, in my world, yes. That's often the first line is working and getting them on, assuming we've done all the other stuff, but I'll always go right to that. So you just push, for example, like, I wouldn't say there's one supplement I say for each kid. It would just depend on what was going on with the kid. I have an allergenic kid. I give him lots of omega-3 because he gets eczema, his immune system, he's prone to hives. So we do a lot of omega. He makes protein shakes. I just buy him omega-3 oils, and he just dumps it in his protein shake. He doesn't, he's good that way. He'll just take it, but it keeps his inflammation low. It's less low. It reduces. So if they're, maybe having a little bit of constipation, I might get some magnesium. The other thing is, can your kids swallow pills? So I train my kids to swallow pills early on. So both my kids are great at swallowing pills. Some adults still can't swallow pills. So in that case, you're looking at like powders and liquids and gummies and stuff. So yeah, so you can use vitamins or minerals nutraceutically, so basically you can use them at pharmacological dosing, different than RDA. So RDA is just to prevent the disease from occurring, whereas if you use higher doses, you're pushing certain pathways and improving whatever you're going for. So yeah, absolutely, whether it's an amino acid, a vitamin, or a protein, an herb. This lady back here first.
Which one? Oh. Suggestions for what to suggest to a 35-ish guy who eats mostly carbs and protein, almost no vegetables. He's not, well, yeah. He's constantly fatigued and he's depressed. First steps, what might be some small recommendations?
Definitely omega-3 oils,
Ah.
right? So getting that, and capsules are liquids. So that would be, because if you improve the brain chemistry, then it's a little easier to do the first step. So that would be one of the basic things. It's like, are they taking omega-3s? If he doesn't do vegetables, some people do the green drinks, like where they just mix powders and stuff. Those can be good, although there's always a caveat, right? Sometimes they can be high in heavy metals. I know from doing heavy metal testing over the years that people who were drinking the green drinks, because they're so concentrated, the greens will soak up heavy metals out of the soil. So, it's like the vitamin D in sunscreen, right? So, so it's okay occasionally. I mean, I wouldn't want people on it forever, but again, if you're gonna get some greens in. But yeah, if you could do something basic. Well, there used to be like a greens first, so there's a lot of like greens powders that are palatable, like people like, or they'll be mixed with fruits too, so they're, you mix them in water, you mix them in a little bit of juice. Doing a protein shake, those are usually pretty good because you can get a lot of nutrients in that. You can add bananas and strawberries and put your fish oil, you can put chia seeds, flax seeds, things like that in it.
When you say carbohydrate,
Do you find that flaxseed and chia seed is as effective as fatty fish?
It's, the fish is one step further ahead, and you need vitamin B6 to do that enzyme to convert the ALA to the DHA. So it can be, but they need to add vitamin B6 to their, so if they take a B6 supplement, if they're gonna do a lot of flax and chia seed.
If
So.
there's anything else to deal with indigestion response to salmon and fatty oils? Omega oil.
Yeah, so if capsules cause regurgitation and heartburn and belching, the Nordic Naturals will be lemon or orange or strawberry flavored, so if they belch, at least you're belching lemon or orange, make a difference. Or liquid, like the Barleans liquid, they usually won't get that. And you start slow and you work your way up. It's kind of the same thing I was saying before about doing a high dose. You always start low and you work up. You don't take the highest dose of something. You start with the lowest dose. You kind of work up, and see if you tolerate it and how you do. So it's kind of one of the simplest things. So maybe sign them up for cooking classes. I think of as adults, a life skill is kind of learning to cook. And so sometimes people don't eat very well because they don't know how to cook. Yeah, so that's what I would do is do a cooking class. And you had a question over here?
Right behind you.
Hello, thank you for this session. Sorry I came in late. I have a question on this. The theme is around allergies. So the kids are allergic to this food and that food. So as I grew up, I didn't even know what allergies were. So I come here and I'm exposed to this world of allergies. And now I have some kids who are allergic to, let's say, walnut, some to something else. What we as parents, I think, are perhaps doing wrong is keeping away from that food. What that does is prevents not just me, but my other kids from exposure to the foods that they are not allergic to. So how do you deal with this situation? Is there a place, and going back to the root cause, people have asked, is this commercialization of food? Should I be really looking into organic, which I've never really spent too much time? Food that are not causing allergies, if there is a thing as allergies, how do I make sure my other kids are not paying the price? How much do I keep my kids away from a certain food? Because I've also heard, they'll grow out. How do I know when they will grow out? So those are some of the questions
I recently went to a conference at Harvard on allergies, thinking, I'm going to get all the answers. No, it's very complicated. It has to do with mediation with the immune system. Allergies are the body's way of saying that there's a foreign invader here. Get rid of it, however you have to do that. Hives, vomiting, diarrhea, anaphylaxis. We don't know why. Why is there more peanut allergy than there used to be? I was originally trained as a dietitian to avoid foods so that the immune system got stronger. What we've learned through really well-done research and reviews of research is that you either have an allergy or you don't. So you're 40% more likely to have an allergy if one or both of your parents have food allergies, not environmental, but food. And why that is, we don't know. It tends to be overdiagnosed. It is related to protein in a food. I love fresh pineapple, and I can't eat a lot of it because it makes my mouth raw. That has to do with the enzyme, not with an allergy. In terms of what you do for your family, in my opinion, I have a lot of families who he's got an egg allergy and she's got a milk. Most kids outgrow a milk protein allergy if you're dealing with that. Peanuts, even now, they're doing really great studies where they bring kids in to a research lab and they give them a tiny bit of some. Have you heard of that? Mm-hmm. And they're losing their allergy. They're losing it because they're building up the immune system under close supervision, right? So that's some of the good news. Otherwise, what some people do is say, I've got one kid with this, we eat it when we're out. Or we only eat this at this table. Or we send him to school with that, but he can't have it at home. But I know, how many of your children have allergies?
Almost everybody has some.
Okay.
I recently found out my daughter has allergies to kiwi. This was like a shocker to me.
Yeah, and that was through an allergist?
Allergies to kiwi.
Yeah. So, yeah, there isn't, again, a lot of times they'll outgrow it. I know some allergists who will say, I have a little guy who has a problem with tomato sauce, but every Friday they get pizza, and the allergist and the pediatrician have said, oh, he gets a little rash, he's fine. Because the value of him sharing pizza with his family far outweighs the fact that he has a little rash and it goes away in an hour. So some of that is how you have kids on EpiPens? Yeah. Okay, yeah. Yeah, and so sometimes what it means is we have to have a pretty clean kitchen, at least for now, and that can be really tough to do, yeah.
But did you say that there are studies being done to give small amounts?
Yes,
of controlled environment?
yes,
Because I've heard that, you know.
yes, and I would Google that too and look into, and again, it has to be done under very strict circumstances. I have 2 little kids going through it right now with peanut, where what they're doing is they're increasing the strength of the immune system, and the immune system doesn't think of the peanut as an enemy. So it's very encouraging news for people with allergies that otherwise, carry an EpiPen everywhere they go and worry about what's in that food. I have a friend who, if back in the day when they would serve peanuts on an airplane, if everybody opened their peanuts at the same time, she would have an anaphylactic reaction.
Yeah.
Just breathing the air, yeah.
Yeah, so that's a key point, and I deal with this as well, having an anaphylactic child. So the first is some kids are airborne and some are not airborne. So what she's describing is the peanuts in the air on an airplane. Some people, they're so allergenic that if it's in the air, they will have an anaphylactic reaction. In my family, my son's case, he has to mix it with his saliva. He has to bite into it and chew. So it makes it a little bit easier. And we have used to be eggs, dairy, and nuts. Now it's just certain nuts and the dairy. So the nuts, the ones that it's pistachios and cashews, I just keep those out of the house. But wherever I go and there's cashews, I'm like, oh, cashews. So I just keep those out of the house. Like they're not even in the house. The dairy is pretty obvious. Like he's not going to drink milk, and I have separate cheeses. But I do know certain families they can't keep a product in the house because just having someone open the jar will trigger a reaction. Mm-hmm. And then the difference between the food, the anaphylactic and the sensitivity is you can be sensitive but not anaphylactic, so you can still kind of feel yucky with it, but it's not going to kill you. You're not going to die from hypovolemic shock or your throat swelling because you've eaten that food. So it's probably just trying to figure out, and I've had parents over the years come in and get the whole family food sensitivity tested and make an Excel spreadsheet and cross-reference it. That is way, way more work than I would want to do, but people do get that level of details. So then you just try and figure out what cooking oil can everyone have? What flour can everybody have? What meat can everybody have? And yeah, save the fun stuff for going out.
And the good news is, back in the day when I started working, you had to order food, special food. I mean, it used to be, you know, it's not awful for gluten-free. And now, I mean, Trader Joe's itself has a ton of products that are gluten-free that are really, really good. The Allergy and Anaphylaxis Network, I think it's called, is one of the good websites. And you don't have to reinvent the wheel. And they have things like products that you can say, this is a certain label, that Alex can eat this and Jenny can't eat that, kind of thing, you know. But most of the time, initially parents really struggle with, oh my God, how am I gonna do this? And once you get it, and if any of you have kids who've had this issue, once you get it organized, for a lot of people, you just know what to pick up at the grocery store and whatnot, and when you can eat something and when you can't. But
We have like 90 years of experience between these guys. So we have time for a couple more.
She's got a question in the back.
Oh, great. Couple more questions.
Thank you. I have a quick question. Now, when we go to the supermarket and buy vegetables or fruits, they do not go bad. They sit in our refrigerator for months. They do not go bad. It's not something that happens to vegetables that we grow in our own garden. You leave it outside, they'll start molding. The biome in our gut is related to immune system. So can you talk to anything to, I'm looking at depression and immune responses. Is there any correlation to how the food is, the veggies and the stuff that is actually healthy, how it's treated, and what can we do? And is there actual relationship that we would be noticing in our kids?
the jury's out on that, really. There's a lot of dyes, like red dye, that people worry about. What a lot of this comes down to is money. And back in the day, you only got strawberries when they were in season. Now we do things to them that, for the most part, we think are safe, because otherwise we'd all be dropping dead left and right, right? But there are things that we do, and some of that recent carrot scare, did you hear about that?
Yeah, the E. coli.
E. coli. So some of it you say, oh, I don't want somebody, on the one hand. On the other hand, I'd rather not be in the hospital for 3 days with something. And they've done it with romaine lettuce, there's all kinds of things. So, but a lot of it comes down to USDA regulations. It comes down to preserving food to make it safe on the one hand, but then do you want to eat it on the other hand? And we have I guess, the blessing and the curse of having all kinds of produce that we used to not be able to get, that comes from all over the world. But how do they get it from there to here without it rotting? Yeah.
So yeah, pesticides are endocrine disruptors, so yes, they can affect neurotransmitters. There is a cost, obviously, with groceries being so high, but you buy organic when you can. There is a list that you can kind of look up, like which ones she's talked about, strawberries. Yeah. There's certain produce, like never buy it if it's not organic, because it's super highly sprayed. Grapes, strawberries, things with peels and skins. Usually you're okay with bananas because the pesticides aren't going to land directly on them. And then there are some vegetable washes that you can buy, so you can actually soak and wash the vegetables and try and pull off some of the pesticides. I've known people have a reaction, say, to like an apple, but it wasn't the apple, it was the actual pesticides on the skin of the apple. And if they peeled it, they could do the apple.
And part of that is because we want to eat with our eyes, right?
Yeah.
So you don't want a tomato that looks awful but might taste okay, right? And they do that to the apples because you're more likely to buy them. Oh, they're red and beautiful and shiny.
Yeah, I saw this little video yesterday. They were comparing Fruit Loops from Canada and America, and America uses all these red dyes that are outlawed in Canada, and so Canada is all vegetable and fruit sweetened. And so they were talking about visually, the American one looks nice because it's all pretty colors, and the Canadian one's more dulled down. So the guy did a blind taste test, and he was like, which one tastes better? He's like, oh, this is so much better. This tastes good. This must be the American one. And sure enough, it was like the Canadian one. So the point being is like he was blindfolded, and the one that looked visually not as good had the best taste, and the one that visually looked better didn't taste as good. But yeah, it's a hard one. You kind of do the best you can. And then there's other nuances from my world where like, how's your detoxification? How well do you break it down? How well does the bowels work? Are you constipated? Do we drink enough fluids? Are liver enzymes elevated? Do we have problems detoxifying? So maybe we need to do some liver support, some milk thistle, some things to help the liver detox so that we're not reacting as much to the chemicals, or you have to do heavy metal testing. But yes, it can contribute to anxiety and depression. So that's part of people do. That's the functional medicine testing that you can actually look to say, oh, what else is going on that could be contributing to it? So.
If I can, I mentioned earlier Dr. Johanna Dwyer, who I moved out here to study under. 30 years ago, she said to one of our classes, okay, when you get out of grad school, tell your clients, if they don't die from what they're eating, they're going to die from worrying about it. So everybody take a deep breath, try to eat low on the food chain, and go take a walk. And it's still the best advice I give to people.
You guys have me thinking when I work with my neurodivergent patients, I might have them blindfolded eating, just for fun, like a game.
Yeah, I like that.
To your point about eating, like not eating from the more whole, like things that are closer to nature. So my daughter is joining the growing ranks of people, especially young people, who are going towards plant-based diets and just reducing how much meat they want to consume.
That's great.
And so there are so many products out there that are meat-like. They're trying to look like meat, and they're highly processed and all that. So I would love to hear any thoughts that you have about the trade-off between products that are more processed but are providing a higher amount of protein per bite, if you will, than some of the other things that people would substitute in if they're not eating meat.
Yeah, I mean, personally, I became a vegetarian when I was like 11, thanks to a science teacher I had, who showed us about factory farming animals. And I now eat some chicken and some fish, so more paleo. It's back in the 80s, you had all these like seitan and all these like wheat gluten products, and like looking back, they were terrible. They were like awful food substitutions. And now like I've had that no meat burger, and that is mimicked like a burger, and it's disgusting because it tastes like meat to me, and I'm like, oh, I don't like that. So there was Anne-Marie Coblin, who had a cooking school, Natural Gourmet Cookery in New York City, and she was real big on just like cooking real food and avoiding a lot of these vegetarian non-meat stuff. So it's tricky because they have to be good at like cooking beans and legumes and seeds and nuts and powders, and it's totally doable. But again, I think a lot of it comes back to like learning how to cook and having learning what that is, because there's so many processed stuff out there. It's great in a jam, it's great in a pinch, but yeah, if you're looking at 10 years of a diet and everything's processed, even though it's like meat, even though it's vegetarian, it's not as good. It's not as good on the gut. So a lot of times people notice that like they get bloating, they get constipated. So
what kind of things do you find vegetarians often are lacking?
Well, B12 is the big one because that's going to be high in animal products. So B vitamins in general, and protein is probably the other main one.
Depends on what they're.
Like a white bagel and cream cheese versus like scrambled eggs and a sausage. The scrambled eggs and sausage is going to be way more nutritive than a white bagel and cream cheese, even though it's animal products. But it's hard.
Nitrates in the sauce. I mean, there's always going to be something that you're going to wonder, what do I eat? And even what's it packaged in? I mean, you can lose your mind over some of this stuff. I'm a true believer. I have always eaten well. I have always watched my weight. I have always paid close attention to my sleep hygiene. I've always paid attention to getting enough physical activity, right? I try not to worry about, I do try to eat low on the food chain. I don't eat a lot of processed packaged foods. That's myself, but I'm an adult, right? I work with a lot of families that do a lot of, I have a mom who's sending 3 kids to daycare, and it's a package, pouch. We do the best we can, and I think if you can do a variety in moderation, I don't think there's anything wrong with eating a veggie burger or something. Is it more processed? Yes. One of the things I always recommend is look at the ingredient list on that thing, aside from things that are fortified, like with B vitamins, and maybe iron or something. But the more processed it is, and some of that, like for instance, a turkey burger, you gotta put a lot of stuff in that to make it taste good, you know? Or a black bean burger or whatever. But I certainly think to explore with different things, and it depends. I have no problem with little kids eating goldfish for a snack, as long as they had blueberries or bananas earlier in the day. You know, that's the real world. And if you can't sustain something, what does it matter, you know?
Rotation is the other thing, particularly for food sensitivities. 1 and 4 day rotation is a good rule of thumb. So when people have food sensitivities, not the true allergies, if you eat it once every 4 days, you're fine. You know, if you're having it every day, you're going to be more symptomatic. You know, with the anaphylactic desensitization programs they're doing, you know, they're using micro-dosing peanuts, right? They're giving small amounts to get the immune system to deregulate so it's not so deadly for them. So generally speaking, yeah, if people are sensitive, does it mean they should never eat wheat? No, but should they eat it every day? Yeah, we should probably all rotate it so we're not having it every meal every day. You know, so we have it a couple times a week. So I think that's a good sort of rule of thumb is like rotation, because then you don't, if you are sensitive from an allergy immune gut perspective, you're not overloading the system. You're having a little bit, but you're not having so much that you're causing inflammation in the body.
I just wanted to thank you guys. We are pretty much at time. This was incredible. I think we should give them a round of applause. We hope to see you at the events that are upcoming, and you can always look in the back if you want to see the further dates. Thank you so much again.
Oh, thank you.
You guys have a great night. Thanks for coming.
Okay.
Oh, and
That was so interesting.
feel free to write down your email so we can send you reminders about upcoming events. Thanks again for coming out. Drive safe.